I'm Owen Bigland. This is the Inside Edge video blog. Okay, this isn't going to be one of the favorite blogs I have to do, this one and the next one, but I have to. I'm going to have to talk about some more NDP policies, restrictions, new taxes that are on the horizon here, and I hate doing these. You know, it's funny, in the first 4 or 5 years of my blog, I never really talked a lot about government and their meddling in the real estate market. But of course, I get it. You know, the Vancouver's prices are sky high, real estate prices. There's nothing for sale. Now the rental market has gone completely ballistic. One-bedroom condos that were renting for $2,000 3 years ago are now at $2,700, $2,800. But as I've been saying in my blog here for the last several years, you know, these government interventions, these taxes, they sound good on paper, but there's a reaction to those that the media and the NDP never talks about. When you implement a new tax or a new restriction, there's usually a reaction to that. And you're seeing the proof in the pudding here with our real estate prices continuing to go up. Sure, we're going to be headed for a bit of a pullback here, run-of-the-mill correction, I think. I'll do more blogs on that in the fall and in the winter. But rental rates have gone up, prices are at or near all-time highs. You know, the proof is there. These government interventions and policies and taxes and restrictions are having the reverse effect. So I'm going to point out a couple here. David Eby, our finance minister now? He was our housing minister. Why he didn't implement some of these further restrictions when he was housing minister, a lot of people are questioning. The reason is, of course, is they've got to keep giving people some more carrots here. We can't shoot everything out there and fire everything off at once. We've got to keep giving them some more things to cling their hopes to. And that's what he's done here. So he had a press conference last week, and he's going to be introducing a couple of new. One is a new tax, and one is removal of the rental restrictions on strata. So on this one, I'm going to do this in two parts. This one, let's talk about the flipping tax that he wants to put in place, and I'll brush a little bit on the strata restrictions here a little bit, but I'll save that for another video in a couple of weeks. After I finish this one, I'm going to turn the camera back on and do another video on that. So it'll be a two-parter. But the flipping tax he wants to introduce. So David Eby was saying that, you know, young families, first-time buyers are competing against flippers and speculators for homes in the Lower Mainland here. Now, I would disagree. They are competing with investors that I represent. Flipping, though, there is not a lot of flipping going on. Flipping, to me, is someone who buys a condo and then tries to sell it a month or 2 or 3 months later, or 6 months later, perhaps, at a profit. And I see very little to none of that, at least in Vancouver and in the Lower Mainland here. And I'll go through the reasons for that in a minute here. But, you know, he's complaining that, you know, they're competing against these people. Now, first off, putting in this flipping tax, which apparently we're not sure all the details yet, but if you hold a house less than 2 years, you will be subject to this flipping tax. If you hold it over 2 years, you're exempt from it. And apparently there will be some exemptions, which there better be, for people who sell homes in short order after 5 months or 6 months or a year or 18 months. There will be some exemptions like disability, or you lose your job, or you get a job transfer, or you run into financial difficulty and have to sell. And there better be, because that is the reason when on the MLS, when you see a home that's bought and then sold in quick order, usually there's a reason for that. A lot of times they're not making any money on it when you add in your friction costs, which I'm going to talk about. So there better be a whole lot of exemptions to this. It's going to be tricky. But, you know, he's talking about, you know, well, first off, again, I have no problem with this because I do not work with flippers. They're not around anyways. I work with a lot of investors, though, and I think Mr. Eby's getting confused with investors. So those are the ones I work with. These are people that are going to buy their principal residence and live in it for long periods of time, or they're investors. They're going to buy a condo or buy a duplex or buy a triplex. They're going to put a tenant in it, and they're going to keep it for 10, 15, 20 years. Those are the people I work with. They're investors. They're looking for the big money, and that's where the big money is. They play 9 innings of baseball. They buy, hold it, defer all the taxes, let the capital gains tax run for decades, They avoid or minimize their friction costs, which I'm going to talk to about in a minute. The property transfer tax, the biggest tax grab known to man. Your, in some cases, GST, the commission to sell a property, which is could be $20, $30, $40, $100,000 or more is what I'm going to charge to sell, plus a couple of sets of lawyers and conveyance fees. And I'll break down the friction costs on these. So flipping is extremely, extremely rare, and it has been for a long time. You need so many things to go your way to flip a home in short order these days. The first thing would be it has to be in a market that is on an absolute tear, where the market is going up 2-3% month over month, continuously, month after month after month. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to get a tremendous deal on that home. Those things can happen. I see it all the time. Realtors that misprice homes or don't market homes properly, or perhaps take an offer 1 or 2 days on market, which I still see. I just bought one not long ago representing a buyer. We were able to get an offer in 2 days. They should have done holdbacks. A good realtor is going to list the property, show it for 8 or 9 days, then look at offers. So you need those things for sure. You need the market to be going up. You need to get a tremendous deal on the way in. But remember, just buying a basic 1-bedroom condo downtown in Vancouver for $700,000, you need that condo to go up $50,000 just to break even. Because you've got the PTT on the way in, 1% on the first $200,000, 2% on the balance. If you want to get into more expensive properties like a $2 million condo or a detached home on the west side, watch out. I don't know if people are aware that the NDP just bumped up the property transfer tax recently. So now it's 2% up to $2 million, 3% on anything over between $2 million and $3 million, and over $3 million they hit you with a 5% PTT. Remember, folks, the PTT, I've done many blogs on this, the property transfer tax, biggest tax grab going. Introduced in the 1980s, I think it was 1983, as a wealth tax. At that point, only 1% of all the properties sold in the Lower Mainland triggered that 2% rate over 200 grand. That's back when you could buy a detached home on the east side for 175 grand. Now, of course, you can't even buy a studio condo in Vancouver for under 450K. But the PTT has never been adjusted, never been indexed to reflect our current property values. So the PTT is a killer. You've got commissions. For me to sell a $700,000 condo, it goes up, let's say, in 6 months, and you can try and sell it for $800,000. Well, I'm going to charge you $25,000 to sell that condo. If it's a new condo, you're going to have GST. Now, there was some speculating going on pre-sale condos several years back, but that loophole has been closed. I've done blogs on this. You know, the Revenue Canada now is double dipping on the GST. And you see, buying a pre-sale, there was a lot of time in there to let a condo appreciate. You were buying it as a pre-sale, but you weren't getting the keys for 3 or 4 years. So hardly a flip. You had 4 years in there. If the market was in your favor, sure, you paid $600 for the condo. Now it's worth $675. But you've got the GST on it. It's very difficult to assign those condos now because they won't let you put them on the MLS. You have to pay the GST. Then when you go to sell it in short order, if it's anything less than a year, the new buyer or the new seller will have a second set of GST on this. It's negotiable. I've done many blogs on this. The other thing is Revenue Canada, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, started cracking down on flippers and speculators. What they did is if you start selling homes on a continuous basis, in other words, if you had 3 homes that you bought and sold in, let's call it a 6-year period, you're going to get audited by Revenue Canada. They're going to come back and they're going to say, you've sold 3 homes in 7 years. This seems like a pattern. This seems like this is a business you're running here. This isn't just you moving and buying and moving in that a normal person would do. They're going to audit you, and you are not going to get the advantage of even the capital gains tax. Any profit you make will be taxed at your full marginal tax rate. So Revenue Canada has been lowering the boom on this for many, many years now. we already have a speculation tax in place. It's called capital gains tax. And again, if Revenue Canada sees that you have bought and sold homes on a continuous basis here, bought or sold 2 or 3 homes over, again, 5 or 6 year period, you're going to get audited, and they're not even going to give you the benefit of that capital gains tax. They're going to say that you're running this as a business, and you're going to pay the full marginal tax rate on it. So I think, again, this flipping tax is going to be a non-event. This is not going to do anything to help have homes more affordable. It's not. I don't work with flippers. There are very few out there. But again, this is kind of a smoke and mirrors way to get votes by government, socialist governments. They tell you they're going to help you get into home ownership, and they slowly trickle in all these things. The foreign buyers tax, and then raising the foreign buyers tax, and then the BC speculation tax, and then the restriction on how much landlords could raise the rent, rent freeze for 2 years, and now a 1.5% and a 2% over the last 2 years. But what has that done? Rent rates have soared, and real estate prices are at or near all-time highs, especially if you're looking for a good 1-bedroom condo. I'm still getting bidding wars on them, and there's nothing for sale. So I don't think these things are going to do very much. Where this will affect in some situations would be renovators. I've done several blogs talking about this. They're not out there very much now, for sure, especially not now when the market is kind of slower. We're having these interest rate hikes. We're not getting 2-3% month over month price increases now. We're in a down market. Prices are trending lower right now slightly. But back over the last 10 or 15 years, I've talked about it. There was a group, several groups of these pros out there, Czechoslovakian and Russian guys that were tradesmen. They held the real estate license too. Whenever I would get a rundown duplex or a rundown townhome that needed a full reno, or even a 1-bedroom condo, a lot of times these guys would be in the mix because they were professional renovators. So what they would usually do is they wanted to lowball you. I would list a good townhome, the unit, it was in a good complex, usually a trustee sale for me or an estate sale. And it had to be a good strata. That's the first thing. They knew what they were buying. I would list it, and I would be doing holdbacks like I do with all my listings. I'm going to list it, show it for 8 or 9 days, and then look at offers. They would always come in after day 2. They'd look at it quick and write me an offer on it, a bully offer. And I would tell them, listen, I'm not going to entertain your offer. Offers on this are next Thursday or next Wednesday. But it was always a lowball offer. They would rarely get it because these guys were smart. They had a certain price they needed to get it at. They knew what their renovation costs would be, and they have to leave a buffer in there. They got to play it safe just in case the market turns over the next 3 or 4 months between the time they buy it, the time they finish the reno, and the time they have to put it on the market. So seldom did these guys ever get the units, but sometimes they did, and sometimes I would sell these, dilapidated 1-beds and 2-beds and duplexes and townhomes to kind of a mom and pop renovator, father and son team. These guys provided a very good service that, of course, the NDP is oblivious to. What they would do, they would come in, they would buy the condo, a 2-bedroom condo. It needed a full reno. They were smart. They knew how to do the work. They had it down to a system. They were professional trades. They would do the renovation on it, probably on a 2-bed, spend $70,000, $80,000, and then turn around 4 months later and relist it as a turnkey unit. They would do the same with townhouses, put $100,000 or $125,000 into it, and sell it 4 or 5 months later after the reno. They had some profit built in. Remember, these guys did all the work themselves. When you're doing a reno, it's 50% material, 50% labor. Well, they bypass all the labor. If I had to do it, I'd have to hire trades. So they get some cost savings there. And then a lot of these guys, especially these Czechoslovakian and Russian guys, one of these guys on the team would have a real estate license. So they would list it, and at least they'd save half the commission. They'd still have to pay the cooperating commission. But they provided an excellent service for first-time buyers and young families. And here, let me explain to you. They buy the condo or the townhouse for $700,000. They put a $100,000 reno into it, half of which is material only, so they're really only into it for 50, because they save on the labor, and then list it for 8 1/4 or $799. So when a young family was coming in and buying these units, you needed to have the spare $100,000 cash to do that reno. And again, you weren't a professional renovator. You had to hire trades, hire plumbers, hire electricians. Many people just didn't have the background or the connections for those tradespeople. Most don't. So when someone was looking at a condo, a young family first-time buyer, $700,000 for this townhouse, hey, I like it, but I've got all my money, my 15% or my 20% tied up into my down payment, and I'm borrowing the rest, putting down a conventional mortgage. I don't have the spare $100,000 or $125,000 cash to buy the unit and then do the reno. Well, what these trades guys would do, these professional renovators, they would put it back on the market at $800,000 or 8 1/4, and it's a turnkey product. Now this first-time buyer family can mortgage that. They don't need the $100,000. They only need another $20,000 and can mortgage the difference. So something like this is probably going to eliminate that. And they were providing, again, a pretty darn good service by doing turnkey units that were already renoed that the buyer could mortgage, add it to the mortgage, as opposed to having the cash. So these are little things that the media will never pick up on. Only a guy like me who's dealing in this business, these frontline stories, are going to be able to give you this stuff. But flippers and speculators are extremely rare in this market. They were extremely rare even with COVID and the market going up. There's so much risk involved. There's a few pros out there. Most of them were the renovator type guys, buying these dilapidated units, saving on the labor because they do all the work themselves. They only do the materials. Usually one of them was a licensed realtor, and they turn it 3 or 4 months later. So remember, these flipping taxes is not going to affect my business at all. So stay tuned for another blog. This next one I want you guys to watch for sure, because this one might be one of the worst. There's been a lot of dumb things. This cooling off period starting next year, that one was really dumb, totally unnecessary, not going to do anything for the market. This flipping tax is not going to do anything to help people buy condos. If anything, it's a restriction because it'll reduce these guys that were at least renovating these units. But the NDP want to eliminate rental restrictions on strata. So these are going to be mostly older strata. You know, it's funny. David Eby on the one hand says that, you know, we're going to put a flipping tax in because flippers are coming in and outbidding families on these units, which they're not. Investors might be, but flippers aren't. And at the same press conference, we're going to eliminate the rental restriction. Well, listen, Mr. Eby, you're taking away the only advantage these first-time buyers and families that you're trying to protect had. Because guess what? When you remove that, I'm going to talk about this more in the next video, I've got a list of about 10 strata that I would love to get some investors into, but they don't allow rentals. Or they have 200 units and they allow 5% to be rented. It's full and there's a 5-year waiting list. Well, when you're taking away now the only advantage that these principal buyers had for those type of units, because they weren't competing against investors. Now they are going to be competing against investors. I'm going to be representing investors on some of these good quality older strata that we couldn't buy previously, but when you remove that rental restriction, we are going to be able to buy. And guess what? I feel for these people, these first-time buyers and families. They're not going to win. They're going to be in a bidding war. The investor, the kind of guys I'm representing, have got deep pockets. There's no emotion involved in the purchase. We're going to be putting in subject-free offers, no inspection, bank draft attached. These are strong buyers, much stronger than the first-time buyer or the young family. So I don't know what he's doing here. You know, I've had many strata that I've sold, and I'll talk about this in the next video, that did not allow rentals or had a very low cap. And as soon as I listed these, the calls I would get would be from realtors, can my buyer rent it? No, you can't. I'm out. So it was the one advantage that these first-time buyers and young families had. They didn't have to compete against investors. Now they will. So you'll see a huge spike in the prices in these strata, because before it had to be a principal residence buyer. Now you're opening up the full demographic of buyers. Stay tuned for my next video on this. I think it's going to be a real eye-opener for you guys. I'm Owen Bigland. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks to all my new subscribers. I'll see you next week.